We have a returning guest, and I want to thank everybody for listening to Fire Breathing Rob on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to our videos and share them. So first of all, Jess, thanks for being a returning guest on Fire Breathing Rob. And, last time you were on, it was about maybe 6 to 7 months ago.
Yeah.
Obviously, the primary was kind of slowly getting into the thick of things with you and also with the presidential primary. So thanks so much, Jess, for coming back on the program. Greatly appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for inviting me back. I'm happy to be here.
We've heard through a lot of different sources that because he's close to the Biden campaign, that if Joe Biden does win the presidency, Chris Coons could have a spot in his administration. So, goes to show you that somebody is not looking to be the senator for the people of Delaware. He's just looking to move up in his political career. What does that say to people that are voters in Delaware when somebody's already looking, for the next job instead of, serving the job that they were elected to serve, which is the senator of Delaware?
Right. Yeah, and that's a real point of frustration for me. And it's even something that I've had to talk to people about because, as you mentioned, I'm a first-time candidate. And there were people who, maybe more establishment type people who criticized me for running for Senate as a first-time candidate and said that I should work my way up, that I should start at the school board and work my way up. And I think that if that's how you see local government, you're seeing it completely wrong. Like, the school board is not an entry-level job. You should not be looking at, I'm going to get on the school board and I'm going to sit there for a couple years and then I'm going to move to county and then I'm going to move to state and then I'm going to try to run for federal office. Like, I want people on my school board who care about my school, not who care about what this means for their resume and their ability to get the next job. So I really criticize that idea that there should be this progression through levels of government. I think it's more about what are the issues that you actually deeply care about and what is the seat that can help you and that you can use the power of to actually affect change on those issues. And that's why I'm looking at the federal level, because the things I care about, like healthcare and our environment and economic justice, are things that need to happen at a federal level. So I bristle at that feeling of this, where you see that sort of ambition in someone, because I think that's a misuse of a seat. I did call on Chris Coons to confirm that he's going to serve out a 6-year Senate term if he's elected, because we should know that going into this race. You should not be running for one job when you're also kind of working for another. And what would happen if he were to be reelected and then appointed is that we would get another hand-picked appointment to go to that seat that no one elected before a special elections, and then they have an incumbency advantage, and it again takes away the power of the voter to choose who represents them. So I do find that, I think that that's something that he needs to acknowledge and respond to. I also think that we really need to think about what a Secretary of State Coons would look like, because we need to be really clear on his record on foreign policy. He likes to talk about his foreign policy experience, but his experience with foreign policy is incredibly hawkish, it's incredibly imperialistic, and it's frankly short-sighted. And I think it's been dangerous in the Senate, and it would be dangerous as the Secretary of State. I think it would be troubling because he believes that the US should exert military and economic power over other countries to make them conform to what he called Western principles. What does that mean in practice? That means keeping us in endless war so that we can extract resources for our own gain, kill millions of innocent people in foreign countries, and further destabilize the world. I mean, he himself has admitted that he's a hawk. He has said that within the Democratic Party, this is a quote, I tend to skew a little bit more towards the value of hard power. So Secretary of State is not a hard power position. So if you yourself are saying that's what you prefer, and he was comparing, soft power and diplomacy to hard power and militarism, that is not someone I want in the top diplomatic seat. He has a financial incentive for the US to be in war, both personally and for his campaign. His family company, Gore, is heavily invested in profits from war. They have military contracts with the government. And he's already taken almost $50,000 from the defense industry just this election. So this is someone who is sort of conflicted in that way and really needs to address that conflict. And you mentioned he's on TV all the time. Last fall he was on Fox News advocating for war with Iran after they allegedly bombed those Saudi oil fields. He championed the assassination of Soleimani as saying it would make the world safer, which I don't believe anyone believes is true. And he voted against in 2018 hearing a Democratic bill that would have ended US funding of Saudi arms that were used to bomb Yemeni civilians. So this is not someone that I want in that position for our country.
No, as you said, somebody that's supposed to be diplomatic and try to, make peace in the world, not make more war. Jess, let's talk about the stimulus bill and how people are hurting. The stimulus, what would you have done if you were in the Senate, or when you get to the Senate, what will you do for working people that, may be out of work and not get their jobs back due to this virus?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question because we have not seen a people-centered stimulus bill yet. The CARES Act that did pass, as you mentioned, had a $500 billion that was leveraged into trillions of dollars that went to incredibly low interest loans to corporations. I think the part that is incredibly important there is that while there were some oversight rules written in, there's not any real enforcement. So while there's sort of guidelines around how that money is supposed to be used, there's no real way to have any teeth behind it, which is exactly what we saw in 2008, the same exact mistake being repeated. And when we see things like even the companies that were saying, oh yeah, to take the money, we had to keep people on until September, they've already announced that after September, they're going to lay people off. So people know that this kind of like second shoe is going to drop. So we have not yet seen a bill that actually supports people. The CARES Act cut checks to some people for $1,200, a one-time payment. That is not nearly enough to sustain people through this pandemic.
Well, not even that, Jess. Sorry to interrupt, but $1,200, you can't pay rent in any state in the country for 1 month with that.
Right. It's not nearly enough. No one is going to be able to survive on that. However, my opponent stood on the Senate floor and championed it and said it was a remarkable payment. And we are so proud to have, he literally complimented Donald Trump in saying that, giving him credit for advocating for direct payments to Americans. And that is someone who has no frame of reference on what the world is really like, what it's really like to get to the end of the month and not be able to pay your bills, and thinking that $1,200 will sustain people and placate them enough to say, well, we gave you something, please be quiet now. And it's disgusting. People are struggling. What is going to happen is that we're going to have a public health crisis that is now turning into an economic crisis because people can't work. And it's going to turn into a housing crisis because people can't pay their rent or pay their mortgages. So what I would have liked to see is regular payments, ongoing, $2,000 a month at least, until the end of this pandemic, and probably further after that, to give people a window to catch back up and get their feet back under them. I would have liked to see, instead of what we did in the most recent House bill, which is using public money to pay COBRA subsidies to private insurance companies for premiums, I would have liked to see using Medicare to cover everyone through this time. Because that to me is actually like an incremental step and a first step towards Medicare for all that would get people comfortable with the idea of where we're trying to go. But instead, what we have is taking, again, public money to pay people's COBRA premiums, which doesn't even get them health care. That gets them insurance that they then have to pay to use after they've lost their job and they have no income. None of these things actually work for working people. They sound like they're good on the surface. It's like, oh yeah, you'll keep your health insurance and it won't cost you anything. But then as soon as you go to use that, what is it going to cost you, and do you have that money? So I would have liked to see extension of Medicare. I would have liked to see direct payments, and I would have liked to see cancellation of rent and mortgage through this period to ensure that people don't become unstable in their housing.
Well, Jess, and I agree with you, and to move on to the next question, but just to finish off what you were saying, it's true that the whole thing, we could pass Medicare for all. It's the time right now. And not even just that, you spoke about COBRA, and also they're trying to push Obamacare now back and re-enrollment. Who's going to pay for COBRA when they have no money? I have a friend that lives in New York. They were paying $600 a month. And who's going to pay for the reopening of Obamacare?
Right. I had to be on COBRA when I was laid off and after the Great Recession.
Yeah.
And it cost me over $700 a month. And I tried to do it for like a couple months, and I just couldn't keep it up because I thought, oh, I'll do this, I'll get a job, I'll be fine, but I couldn't get that next job. And the problem with both that and then even Obamacare is even if the federal government can help you pay the premium every month. So as an example, that Obamacare, there's plans, the cheapest plan that I saw sort of in our marketplace last open enrollment was $300 a month with an $8,000 deductible. If you make no money, maybe you can get a subsidy for that $300 a month. But where are you getting the $8,000 for that deductible? So it's just insurance that you're paying for. We're giving money to a private company that acts as a middleman that stands in the way of you getting any actual care. So it doesn't solve the problem for people. It gives them like a catastrophe plan if things go really terrible and they do end up needing to be, hospitalized or in the ICU, but all they're going to come out with is a massive bill. And in a state like Delaware, where 30% of the people are struggling with medical debt, that is not a solution that's going to work for our state.
Let's continue on the stimulus issue.
Sure.
I want to talk about this. Whose fault do you believe this crisis is? I blame it on the whole government, Democrats and Republicans. They refuse, as you spoke about, to pass UBI, refuse to pass the Medicare for all, which would help a lot of people with both things being passed. And they knew about this crisis, and this goes through Trump and, his administration. They knew about this crisis back in December and January and did nothing about it. It was just crickets. So, as far as that goes, do you agree with me that it's both Democrats and Republicans is the reason why this crisis has gotten out of control? And I see zero leadership in Washington pretty much to even get any, kind of UBI, Medicare for all. I mean, as much as I love Bernie, Bernie can go on TV and, speak to Cardi B and do his town halls, but that's not standing in Washington. And I know he's 78 years old and, he can only do so much, but I just see zero leadership in Washington. So with that said, do you agree with me that you blame the Democrats and the Republicans for this crisis?
Oh yeah, I mean, where we are, this is a failure of leadership. None of this had to be this way. This is basically winging it without putting any sort of plan in place or any sort of backstop to actually save people. And I try to keep reminding people that, sure, could they have prevented a public health crisis? Maybe not. But could they have prevented it escalating in the way that it did? Absolutely. Could they have prevented it from putting 40 million people on unemployment, a quarter of our workforce who's now filed for unemployment? Absolutely. Could they have prevented it from making it so that people are going to go broke or lose their homes? Absolutely. These are all things that were choices that were essentially the wrong choice was made. And I think that is really the conversation that's important to have. And I think when it comes to even the public health crisis side of things, we are seeing the effects of having a pharmaceutical company executive as your top public health official. Alex Azar is our Secretary of Health and Human Services, a man who Chris Coons campaigned for, went around and lobbied for other Democrats to vote for him, called him competent, and thought he would handle the job well. And why is that? Well, Alex Azar was an executive at Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly contributes tens of thousands of dollars to Chris Coons' reelection campaign. So he helped get him into that seat and confirm him. And now we are all dying as a result and sick as a result because he is inept and not a public health official and obviously incapable of responding to this crisis. So we have been let down by our government. And I think that is the message that I want people to know. This is not their fault. The fact that right now what's going to happen is states start to reopen is that every person is going to be left to make, again, an individual choice. The onus is going to be put on them to make the choice of, do you forego your health potentially, or do you forego your income? Because if your employer opens back up and you choose not to go back in, you're going to get booted off your unemployment insurance and you're going to have no income. So instead of having a unified approach from the government to say, this is how we're going to take care of people, we have left people again and again to fend for themselves, and the results are unfortunately catastrophic.
I can't believe that no one's doing anything in an election year. You would think they would be jumping up in the air trying to get things done for the people to get those votes. They don't care.
No, instead we've got people like, again, Chris Coons and Mitch McConnell already talking about the debt and the deficit, as if anyone cares about debt or deficit when they are literally worried about their family getting sick and dying or losing their home.
Well, what about the debt and the deficit when they are spending $786 billion on wars overseas, as you said, to do with Chris Coons, as he gets all this money from the military-industrial complex? No one says anything about that when they passed the Trump tax scam 2 years ago, and there was no concern about the debt and the deficit.
No, we weren't hearing
for rich people getting money, but for when it's regular working people getting money, we got to worry about this. And the scariest thing I heard was, you have people like Mitch McConnell and other Republicans saying that they're worried that people are making more money on unemployment than they would if they were working regular jobs. I mean, that's really mentally sick for somebody to say that through a health crisis.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion on
and
that.
fail to recognize that then maybe that person should be making more money in
Agreed.
their regular job, and not seeing that as the problem, instead seeing it as, we want to make sure that they don't get any penny more than we think they're due. It's really, I think, exposed a lot of the just cruelty and failure to stand up for working people that most of our elected officials feel. And I think people are seeing that, and this has pulled back the curtain in the way that a lot of people just are you hear people saying, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to figure out how to do mutual aid in our own communities. We have to figure out how to organize our own apartment buildings so that we can stand up to our landlord and talk about like the fact that we can't pay rent. So in some ways, people are recognizing that it's going to have to be on them to build that solidarity and that power from the ground up. And I hope we can actually use that and continue to say, this is actually how you get change. Because it's not just going to come from, it's got to come from the ballot box and from the streets. Like, it cannot just be one or the other. And this has been an opportunity for people to come together and say, how do we build power outside of the halls of Washington for ourselves?
You're living in Delaware, Jess, obviously running for the U.S. Senate. What is your opinion on Governor Carney and how he's being received, and how he's done his job throughout this crisis?
Yeah, I will say, I think that I was impressed with the swiftness of making a decision to put a state of emergency in place in our state, as well as the stay-at-home shutdown order. We, I think, kind of led on that, and we were out in front of recognizing that the way that we are going to make sure that we don't overwhelm our hospitals or lose a lot of lives or end up with so many more people sick than they need to be is to stay at home. So we were ahead of the curve on that, and I applaud the governor for doing that, because that was absolutely the right move. The piece that's kind of missing is sort of the same thing we're talking about with the CARES Act, is that if you tell people they have to stay at home, if you tell people they have to close their businesses, you can't leave them without some sort of economic support. And that's where we've kind of fallen short. Because of the extra $600 of unemployment that came from the federal government, that's a good thing, but none of the states were in a place to actually enact it. So it took like a month, if not more, for the state of Delaware to get up to speed to be able to handle that. And that is another place where it looks like the state is failing, but it's more that the federal government and the state government didn't really coordinate or come up with a plan how anyone's actually going to deliver this money. So people are frustrated by that, but it's not really the fault of the state, because they did not have the structure in place to deliver it. So that's one thing that kind of is this strange point of failure, because we lack any real infrastructure to deliver direct payments to individuals. We can do it to corporations all day. You know, we can just tell Congress tells the Fed and, you know, change the budget line here, move the decimal point, and that money gets out to corporations in days. But we don't have that same structure to deliver money to individuals. And I think we saw that breakdown through this period. So I would have liked to have seen more support for individuals, and what we called on and continue to call on as people are still struggling is an actual cancellation of mortgages and rent, because we did get a eviction and a foreclosure moratorium. So during this crisis, no one can be evicted, no one can be foreclosed on. Of course, there are landlords who are trying to work around that, and we have to be really careful and call those people out and report them. But what happens is, as soon as that state of emergency is lifted, you only have 30 days to catch back up. So if you've fallen behind, now we're going to hit June 1st on Monday. So now we've talked, that's been 3 rent payments that people might have missed. And we know, what was it, like millions of people weren't able to pay their rent on May 1st. The same is going to be true on June 1st. So if there's someone who's fallen behind by 3 months, they are going to have 30 days to catch up. Where are they going to find 3 months of rent in 30 days? So the day that things can come back online, we're going to have thousands of people who are going to be brought into court for eviction proceedings and get booted out of their homes. And that's the type of stuff that has been lacking in the response. And that's the type of stuff that I think makes it so that people can actually stay home. If you give someone economic stability and housing stability through this crisis, then they don't have to make the choice about, do I need to go find a job right now in the middle of a public health crisis? So that's one thing. I think the people who are literally holding signs saying they need haircuts and need to get back into their restaurant that they like that's, I don't have a lot of sympathy for that viewpoint. No. Because what you are saying is that your personal comforts are more important than the safety and health of workers. And I completely disagree. We need to be looking out for every single person here. And the wealthiest and the most comfortable people are not going to be the ones who are put in jeopardy if we reopen too quickly.
Oh, it's really sad, I believe, for what this country's come to in the past, several years, that we really don't care about each other as much as, it seems like, we used to.
Well, it allowed us to have that conversation, I think. And I think that is an important conversation to make sure you're having during this time, is like, our government should exist to care for the people in this country. And we have to unlearn this kind of individualism and this every man for himself that has been sort of pushed down our throats, particularly for the last generation, 40 years or so. Because that is not how a country actually survives. That's not how a society functions. Like, we need to have care and concern about ourselves and our neighbors, because if my neighbor is sick, I see that as something that harms me as well. Like, I have to recognize that if they die, that's a loss to my community. It's a loss to my neighborhood. Like, we have to begin to extend the concept of community broader than just your own immediate family who you need to take care of. Like, this concept has to be bigger, and we have to look out for each other, because if we don't stand together and take care of each other, like, that is how society fails, and that's how we're failing each other.
We've seen in the past few weeks with the police brutality, it's, gotten out of control. I believe this has been going on for years upon end. But we, saw in the last administration of everybody loved President Obama, but he militarized the police. They were going into Flint, Michigan, and I watched Michael Moore's film, and he was showing that they were even, practicing of what they were going to do in Iraq in warehouses in Flint, Michigan. So this all goes back to I feel like the militarization of the police. And that's just didn't start under Obama. That was just escalated under Obama, as that's been going for years.
Yeah, and it's not a Trump thing, which people keep trying to say as well. This is not new. You talk about Trayvon Martin, you talk about the fact that this has been going on for 30 plus years. Well, far longer than that, but like my entire life and lives before that, right? And I think what we have to remember is that, the police were not created to protect and serve the population. Their function is not to stop crime, and it's not to enact justice. I think we absolutely need to reimagine what policing is, and it needs to include accountability to the people. It needs to include, as you said, demilitarization is a huge factor. I talk about this a lot, and I don't hear too many other people talk. Now you hear it, but you don't hear it that often. The fact that when you see the police departments in Minneapolis wearing gear that was made by military contractors, why does that exist in a city police department? Why is that something that they own? If you own that gear as an officer in that department, how is it not going to turn you into thinking, how is it not going to affect your thinking to see yourself as someone occupying a territory, and see yourself as doing the acts of imperialism and war that we do in other foreign countries? We absolutely need to do things like decriminalizing poverty or nonviolent crimes. Things like traffic tickets can turn into jail sentences for people. Things like broken taillights can turn into police brutality because someone gets pulled over and they go to pull out their wallet and the cop thinks they're pulling a gun and then they get shot. Like, we need to decriminalize more things. I think that goes same thing, like ending things like broken windows policing and, frankly, profit or quota driven policing. If your police department is trying to hit numbers or hit dollars for tickets, that is not how policing should be operating. And I think, frankly, we should be investing in more roles like social workers and counselors rather than just cops, because those are people who are actually trained and capable of responding to a lot of the situations that cops try to respond to now and only escalate the situation. So I really believe that we have to reimagine what policing is, and we need to spend more, fund more schools and fund more community centers and work on the things that actually rebuild the communities that have been so brutalized, rather than investing in more cops. I'll use the example of the city of Wilmington. The city of Wilmington, there was a study conducted last year on data from 2016. The city of Wilmington was spending more per capita on policing than any other city in the study. It was over $900 per capita, and the average was about $360. And what's most disappointing about that is that it hasn't seen a decrease in crime. It has seen an increase in brutality. I reminded people of this week. This is not a far off problem. This is a problem in the state of Delaware. We've had, since 2016, I can count at least 5 incidents of cops shooting people, and in 3 cases, killing them. So this is not a problem that exists only in some places. It is pervasive, it is systemic, and it absolutely needs to come back to changing what policing means in a community.
Jess Scarane, thanks so much for your time. Can you tell people where they can find more about you and how they can help you, and also when the election is, of course?
Yeah, absolutely. So our election is the Democratic primary in the state of Delaware on September 15th. You can find out more about me at justfordelaware.com. We always need donations and we always need volunteers. I mentioned we're phone banking for 9 hours every day, so more people to do that is always helpful. You can go to justfordelaware.com/volunteer to sign up, or you can go to justfordelaware.com/donate to make a donation and help us pay for all that phone banking. So